Hey everyone, Mr. Foster here. We have finally we've made it to Friday afternoon, and I finally have some time to do a video update. So for this week, I just wanted us to focus on Allegory of the Cave, and in this video update, I will give us some more background information about why we do Allegory of the Cave in this class. So we are still in our introduction readings right now. So for week one, we did the readings on rhetoric, rhetorical strategies, stuff like that. And this week we are looking at Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which is a philosophical text, but I use it in this class for a few reasons. So I want us to think about Allegory of the Cave in terms of writing and research, which is what we're doing in this class, right? We haven't really jumped into it yet, but when we do, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the writing process and the research process, right? So in Allegory of the Cave, we have our setup, right? Where we have the prisoners who are shackled. The reading uses the term fettered, right? They're in fetters, which are chains and shackles, and they from birth, right? They're in these chains, and all they see are shadows that are projected from a fire behind them, right, on the wall in front of them. So, and it goes on to describe the figures that are making the shadows are not even real figures. They're made of stone and wood and other things, right? So what you have is you have these prisoners who are being forced. The reading uses the term compelled to hold their heads forward, and all they see are these shadows of these fake objects, right? So they're not really seeing a horse or the shadow of a horse. They're seeing a shadow of a figure of a horse, so on, right? So then the reading is set up as a dialogue, right, between two speakers. And our first speaker says, imagine if one of these prisoners was freed from their chains. And it talks a lot about adjustment and habituation. So it says if one of these prisoners is freed from their chains and they turned around, they would, their eyes would hurt because they're seeing the source of light that's creating the shadows. But then the allegory continues this, right? It continues this by saying, okay, so not only are they um, freed now and they turn around and they see the source of light, but what if on top of that, they are hailed along, it says, up a rough and steep ascent. So think about how none of this that's happening is a pleasant experience for this freed person. Even though they're freed, everything about it is painful and unpleasant, right? Their eyes hurt from seeing the source of light. They are painfully dragged along the rough and steep ascent to the surface. And then when they're on the surface, their eyes are, hurting even more. They're like that old song says, blinded by the light, right? Because they're seeing sunlight for the first time. But it says, as their eyes start to adjust, it says, would they not count themselves happy in the change of being on the surface now and getting to see reality for what it actually is instead of just seeing shadows of fake objects, right? So that's kind of the first part of the allegory. A freed prisoner getting out from the cave. And they're actually dragged. The reading says that they're dragged up the ascent, right? And then they're on the surface, right? And they're on the surface and their eyes adjust and they start to be able to name things that are the real things, right? So, and it makes another interesting point where it says that it says a couple things. It says that would this freed prisoner rather be a serf of another man or a landless man or anything besides going back into the cave. That our first speaker says that, and the second speaker says yes. This now freed person would rather be anything on the surface and would rather that than go back in down in the cave. And then it makes another point where it says that if those that are in the cave um, have a game or honors among them, who could best name the shadows, and that is very important to them, right? It says if this is something that they bestow honors on, would that freed prisoner care about that? It says, would he care about that anymore, right? Would he care about their games and what they do to pass the time by naming the shadows? And the second speaker says he wouldn't care about it anymore, right? Because he knows that they're not doing anything real or anything productive, right? And they're only naming fake objects, right? So it says that he would count himself happy in the change, okay? But then the allegory takes another turn here. It says that if the man who came to the surface and learned the truth of reality, if he went back down into the cave and tried to explain these things to these people that were still down there, would they believe him? And it says even a step further, if they could get their hands on him, would they not try to kill him? Now, this is weird. Why is it saying this, right? So imagine that when the freed prisoner comes back down into the cave, think again about eyes adjusting to light. He's essentially going to be blinded by the darkness of the cave after being on the surface, right? So if he comes back down there and says, hey, everyone, you need to free yourself from the chains and take this really painful journey to the surface, and then you can see all this stuff. It says they're not going to believe him because he can't even see the shadows anymore, right? The reading says that he looks like a ridiculous figure because he is blind in the darkness of the cave. So it says that these people are not going to believe him, and they're not going to agree to take that painful journey to the surface the way he did, because all they see is someone who did all that and now is coming back blind, right? They see him as a blind man. So that's kind of the irony of the allegory here, is that this freed prisoner knows the truth, but no one believes him when he comes back to share the information, right? He knows the truth about the cave, he knows the truth about the shadows, and he knows that there is a surface where everything is actually real. He knows all that, and he's correct, but no one believes him. None of these other people believe him, and it says that they would even try to kill him if he tried to get them to take that same journey, that same painful journey, right? So it goes on, and kind of one of the closing statements of the allegory is it says that anyone who is to act intelligibly in public or private life needs to understand the truth about this, right? It says something along the lines of anyone who is to act wisely in public and private needs to know the truth about this, right? And that's kind of the main point, right? And um, as you are doing the allegory of the cave this week, I know several of you still need to turn in the writing on it. I don't care if you like look up extra YouTube videos or things like that, um, because I know that probably maybe even the video update right now doesn't maybe still doesn't give the clearest picture of the allegory. So if you need to kind of poke around on the internet and see some other things about it, that's fine. But I will go ahead and tell you the way that I relate it to the class, to English 1020 at ETSU, is thinking about it of a way you are, right, going to be tasked this in this class this semester of doing a research project, right? You're going to do a research project. And whatever you go out and find, right, your journey of doing the writing and doing the research is going to be similar to the journey that the freed person took out of the cave to the surface, right? Then once you find all your information, that's when you're on the surface, right? You were kind of on the surface where you gather all that information. Once you do that, you have to find a way to kind of package that information that you find and give it to an audience, give it to readers in an effective way to where they can understand what you found, right? So that's how I connect Allegory of the Cave to what we do in this class, okay? And I think one of the questions I had you answer on the questions for the reading this week was that can you think of a time in history where a big major breakthrough discovery was made and then it wasn't accepted, right? The example I use is, I believe, Copernicus, right? So back in the day, I want to say it's been a while since I've done my history, but in like the 13 or 1400s, so I don't know, somewhere around there. It's been a while since I've actually read the story, but needless to say, back in the day, um, it was believed that the solar system revolved around the Earth, right? And this is something that I believe it was the Catholic Church was promoting, right? And that was what everyone believed, right? It was believed and widely accepted that the solar system, the stars, and everything revolved around the Earth. And I should have fact checked all this before this video. I'm pretty sure I'm correct. It was Copernicus that discovered that that wasn't true, right? Copernicus discovered that everything revolves around the sun, right? And he was correct. His findings were correct, but no one believed him, right? It was not until, hundreds maybe of years later that his findings were actually verified and people believed it, right? At the time, when he tried to present his findings, it did not go over well, right? He, if I remember correctly, got excommunicated, right? He got banished from his society by the church, even though he was correct, even though his information was accurate. No one wanted to believe him. And that's always the example I tie back in with Allegory of the Cave, right? This example of a researcher, right? Someone who knows their stuff, did the work, took that rough journey to find the surface, to find the truth. But then when he came back into the cave, right, theoretically speaking, to share the information, no one believed him, right? So Copernicus and the idea of the um, solar system revolving around the sun instead of the earth is the example I like to give, right? So if you haven't answered that question yet on the questions for the reading and you're watching this video, use that as your answer, right? So that's really all I wanted to talk about for this week. Next week we're going to do our last little set of introduction readings, and then we're going to jump right into the main portion of the class, right? So we're still just in week 2, and we're just doing introduction things right now, and we'll finish that up next week. And then starting in week 4, we're going to jump right into like the main content of the class and go on from there. Okay. So please, if you have any questions about anything so far, please let me know. Um, Other than that, have a good weekend. I'm sorry it took me so long to get this update out, and I will see you next week in a new update.